Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we are going to be tackling uh, how businesses are dealing with all the geopolitical risks out there.
Yeah.
We've got this really interesting article from the World Economic Forum, and it's by Marika Bloom, who is I believe, a leading economist at ING Group.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been talking to European business leaders about how they are dealing with all the risks.
Yeah.
Wars, climate change, supply chain
The whole
issues,
thing.
the whole nine yards.
Yeah.
And they're coming up with some pretty interesting ways to deal with all this uncertainty.
What I think is fascinating is how they've shifted from just reacting to crises to really building in resilience.
Right. It's like you can't ignore these things
Yeah.
anymore.
You can't bury your head in the sand.
Yeah, you can't just hope that it goes away.
Right.
So what are they doing about it?
Wow.
Well, this article outlines 4 key strategies that businesses are using to manage these risks: risk assessment, risk reduction, ring fencing, and rapid response.
So it's like a whole toolkit that they're using.
Yeah. Like a whole new playbook.
Yeah, exactly. And what's cool is these aren't just abstract concepts.
Right.
These are actual tangible things that companies are doing
Yeah, they're putting this into
to
practice.
stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so let's dive into the first one, risk assessment. Companies are hiring, it's interesting, government relations gurus. Almost like,
Like geopolitical detectives.
yeah,
Yeah.
whose job it is to figure out, like, okay, what's coming down the pike?
Yeah.
Think about new regulations, sanctions, potential conflicts. What's going on?
Exactly. They're trying to get ahead of it, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to see, okay, what could potentially disrupt
Exactly.
our business down the road and how can we prepare for it?
And it's not just about governments. Companies are also dissecting their supply chains
Yeah.
and those of their partners, looking for any weak points, any
Right.
vulnerabilities. Think about the semiconductor chip shortage,
Yeah.
right? That was a big wake-up call for a lot of companies.
It was. That kind of showed how fragile some of these global supply chains can be
Exactly.
because you had this relatively, small event or seemingly small event, halfway across the world
Right.
that ended up impacting
Huge.
not tons of different industries.
Yeah, rippling effects. And some companies are preparing for those extreme scenarios.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what if the war in Ukraine escalates? What if the global order collapses?
I mean, they're really kind of, thinking about
Yeah, hope for the best.
hope for the best, but prepare for the worst type of mentality.
Yeah. And there was one leader in the article who said, and I'm quoting here, "A lot of the developments have been painful, but their magnitude was at the border of our normal business cycle.
Okay.
The West ending economic ties with China, however, would be very hard to overcome."
Yeah, that's a big one, right?
It's a huge one. And it really just shows how interconnected
Right.
everything is these days.
Yeah, it's all tied together. And if you pull on one string, who knows what's going to happen? It's like that Jenga tower. You pull out the wrong block
Exactly.
and the whole thing comes tumbling down.
But it's not all doom and gloom.
No.
Companies are getting creative about how to manage these risks, and that's where our next strategy comes in. Risk reduction.
So this is where it shifts, right? This is where it goes from reactive to proactive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one big trend is diversification.
Yeah.
So, for example, manufacturing companies are moving away from that China for China model,
Mm-hmm.
and they're spreading out production across different regions, adopting more of a local for local mindset.
Yeah.
They're diversifying their suppliers so they're not relying on one single source.
Right. They're spreading the risk, essentially. It's like
Yeah.
having multiple escape routes.
Yeah. And it's not just manufacturing companies. Service companies are doing the same thing,
Oh, yeah.
becoming more localized and less dependent on any one market.
Absolutely.
Now, it's interesting, though, that these changes, yeah, they are influenced by geopolitics,
Right.
but it's not the only thing driving these decisions,
There's a bunch of factors.
right? Things like cost optimization,
Mm-hmm.
finding new growth opportunities,
Yeah.
regulatory changes.
It's almost like
All these things are playing a part.
like a multi-layered cake.
Right.
And geopolitics is just one layer, but it's a pretty big layer these days.
It's a big slice of that cake these days.
Yeah.
Now, remember how companies were stockpiling inventory after the semiconductor crisis? Well, now that trend is reversing.
Uh-huh.
They're trying to reduce those stockpiles to save on costs,
Yeah.
even if it means maybe taking on a bit more risk.
So it's like a trade-off
It is.
between, cost and risk.
Right. And then there's the whole cybersecurity piece of the puzzle.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
It's not necessarily driven solely by geopolitics,
Nope.
but, it's become a lot more important.
It's become an existential threat for a lot of companies,
Yeah.
especially as, cyber attacks get more sophisticated.
Right.
And the stakes are higher.
Right? Companies are realizing that cybersecurity, it's not just about protecting data anymore.
Right.
It's about safeguarding your whole operations
Yeah, it's about protecting the entire business.
from, these digital disruptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're seeing companies rethink their target markets too.
Mm-hmm.
The article mentioned that OECD countries are becoming more attractive than developing markets.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're looking for these safe harbors in the storm.
Yeah, it makes sense. I
Yeah.
mean, when you're looking to minimize risk, you're going to go to places where there's more stability,
Yeah.
where things are a bit more predictable.
Regulatory stability, reliable financing options, all of those things are becoming a lot more important.
Absolutely.
And then there's the whole China situation.
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky one.
It's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
Western companies, they're scaling back their presence there,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not pulling out completely.
No.
It's like they're trying to manage the risks while still maintaining access to that huge market.
Yeah. It's a balancing act for sure.
It is. It's a tough one.
On the one hand, you have this enormous potential for growth.
Right.
I mean, China's a massive market.
Right.
But on the other hand, there are these geopolitical risks that you can't ignore.
Right. So how do you balance those two things?
Let's have a question.
It is. It is. And speaking of balancing, let's move on to our third strategy, which is all about creating safe spaces. Ring fencing.
So this is about basically creating barriers
Right.
within your business.
It's almost like building a moat around your most valuable assets.
Exactly.
Or, a firewall around your computer network.
Yeah, you're protecting those critical parts of your business.
Exactly. The idea is to separate certain parts of your business,
Mm-hmm.
to minimize the damage if something does happen.
Exactly. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
If one part of your business gets hit, it doesn't bring down the entire operation.
Exactly. Exactly. And the article mentions that companies are ring fencing things like their IT systems, data, even their research and development.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All about damage control.
Containing the damage, minimizing the impact.
Right.
And this is particularly relevant when it comes to China. I mean, you have some companies that are operating there,
Right.
but they're doing it in a way that they can, basically shut down quickly if they need to.
Wow.
Like pull the plug.
Yeah, like an eject button.
Exactly.
Makes sense in a world where things can change so quickly.
Absolutely. You have to be prepared to move fast.
But ring fencing, it's not always about geopolitics, though.
Right.
Sometimes it's just about being more efficient or optimizing how your business runs.
Yeah, sometimes it just makes good business sense.
Yeah, even in a stable world.
Yeah.
The article gave an example of a tech company that centralized their research and development,
Right.
in their home country, just to make things run more smoothly.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
not always about, reacting to threats.
Right.
Sometimes it's about being more proactive.
Yeah.
About optimizing your operations.
About improving how you do business. Now, let's talk about that final strategy, rapid response.
Okay.
This one's about being prepared to act quickly when a crisis hits. It's like having a fire drill.
Yeah.
But instead of fire, we're talking about some kind of geopolitical earthquake or a cyber tsunami.
It's about being able to adapt quickly.
Exactly.
To think on your feet, to make decisions under pressure.
Right. And I think one leader in the article called it training the crisis management muscle.
I love that.
Right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. It's about building that resilience
Yeah.
so you can deal with any kind of storm.
Absolutely. No matter how unexpected or how intense it might be.
But I'm guessing there are different approaches to rapid response, right?
Mhm.
I mean, some companies are probably all about, detailed plans and procedures, and others are more comfortable with a kind of, winging it approach.
Yeah, you have the planners and you have the improvisers.
Right.
And both have their strength.
Right.
Some companies are very structured, they're very process-driven.
Right.
Others are more, agile and adaptable.
Yeah.
It really depends on the company culture
Yeah.
and the type of risks that they're facing.
Right. But regardless of their style, I guess the companies that are successful, they're the ones that can anticipate these crises.
Mm-hmm.
They prepare for them.
Yeah.
And they use them as an opportunity to actually learn and grow.
Absolutely. They don't just react.
Right.
They learn from those experiences and they come out stronger.
They use it as fuel to propel themselves forward.
Exactly. So it's not about avoiding risk altogether.
Right.
It's about managing it.
It's about becoming a master at navigating it.
Yeah,
No matter what the world throws your way.
exactly. It's about developing that strategic agility,
Right.
that ability to shift gears quickly. Right.
and respond to challenges and opportunities.
It makes you wonder, though, how do you even prepare for something as massive as a global conflict?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll be getting into in part 2 of our deep dive.
Stay tuned.
So you asked how companies can even begin to prepare for something as massive and unpredictable as a global conflict.
Yeah, I mean, it feels almost impossible. How do you game plan for something that could rewrite the entire geopolitical playbook, right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah, you're not going to have all the answers in advance,
Right.
but it's more about building a framework, I think, for thinking about the unthinkable and developing the agility to adapt as the situation unfolds.
So less about predicting the future and more about just being ready to roll with the punches, so to speak.
Exactly. It's like, it's like training for a marathon. You don't know exactly what the course is going to hold
Right.
or what obstacles you might face.
Right.
But you prepare your body and your mind to be resilient, to be adaptable. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways that companies are training for these kinds of geopolitical marathons?
So one approach is something called scenario planning.
Okay.
And it's really interesting. Imagine you've got a group of leaders in a room
Right.
and they're brainstorming various what-if scenarios.
Whoa, okay.
Right? Like, what if there's a major conflict in a key region?
Mhm.
What if a cyber attack cripples critical infrastructure?
Right.
They explore the potential ripple effects,
Right.
on their business, everything from supply chain disruptions to political instability.
Oh, wow. So it's like a choose your own adventure, but for geopolitical disasters.
That's a great way to put it. By playing out these scenarios, companies can start to identify their vulnerabilities and develop contingency plans.
Okay.
Again, not about creating a perfect prediction.
Right.
It's more about expanding their thinking.
Yeah. Getting out of that business as usual
Yeah.
mindset.
Exactly, yeah. And, thinking outside the box. Speaking of which, the article also mentions something called wargaming.
Wargaming.
Oh, wow. Which sounds pretty intense.
That sounds intense.
But it's actually, it's a technique that's borrowed from the military.
Okay.
And it basically involves simulating real-world conflict scenarios
Okay.
to test strategies, decision-making processes, all under pressure.
So kind of like a high-stakes role-playing game where the fate of your company is on the line.
Pretty much.
Oh.
Yeah. It allows companies to experiment with different approaches, see what works, what doesn't, identify potential blind spots,
Okay.
in their thinking.
That sounds like it'd be a pretty valuable exercise, but also pretty nerve-wracking, right?
It can be.
To go through something like that.
But the benefits outweigh the discomfort, right?
Yeah.
Because by going through these simulations,
Right.
you're building up that crisis management muscle.
Right.
You're training your teams to think strategically, to communicate effectively, to make tough decisions under pressure.
Oh, I see. I see. So like giving your team a crash course in geopolitical jujitsu.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. To be ready to grapple with whatever the world throws at them.
Exactly. And, it's not just about these big, dramatic scenarios.
Yeah.
Companies are also using these techniques to prepare for things like political protests
Oh.
or natural disasters, more localized disruption.
Well, you got to be ready for anything, right? From
Yeah.
like a minor tremor to a full-blown earthquake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, preparedness, it goes beyond just having plans and procedures.
Right.
Right. It's also about building a culture of resilience.
Okay. What does that look like in practice?
Well, it's about fostering a mindset,
Yeah.
among your employees of adaptability,
Fair.
flexibility, encouraging them to think critically,
Right.
challenge assumptions, be proactive in identifying potential risks and opportunities,
Right.
you know?
So empowering everyone to be a little bit of a geopolitical detective.
Exactly. Yeah. Looking for those clues, connecting the dots, being ready to pivot when the landscape shifts.
I like that. And it's about, having an open communication,
Oh, absolutely.
right, where people feel comfortable sharing concerns,
Yeah.
ideas,
Having that open dialogue.
yeah, observations. Because sometimes, those insights come from the people who are closest to the action.
Oh, absolutely. Frontline insights.
Right. It's like that old saying, 2 heads are better than 1. But in this case, it's more like hundreds of heads are better than 1.
Exactly. By tapping into that collective intelligence of your workforce,
Right.
you can create a more resilient, adaptable organization.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not just about internal preparedness, is it?
Mm.
Companies also need to be thinking about their external relationships as well.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Strong relationships with governments, industry partners, even local communities.
Yeah.
These can be invaluable, in times of crisis.
It's like building a network of allies, right?
Right.
A support system, but a geopolitical one.
I like that. Yeah, having those trusted connections,
Right.
it can help companies navigate those complex regulations, access critical resources,
Right.
even get, early warnings of potential disruptions.
So it's about being a good global citizen.
It is.
Right. It's about building bridges,
Yeah.
fostering those relationships.
Yeah,
That can help you weather the storm together.
exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together,
Right.
in today's interconnected world.
Yeah.
And by working collaboratively, we can create a more stable
Mhm.
and resilient global ecosystem.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, this brings us to, I think, a key question, right?
Mm.
How do companies balance the need to manage risk with the need to pursue growth
Yeah, that's a good one.
in a world that's constantly in flux? It's like trying to walk a tightrope between caution and ambition.
It is. It's a delicate balance, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right. But surely there are some guiding principles.
Right. I think so. One principle is to avoid becoming paralyzed by fear.
Okay. So don't let the fear of what might happen prevent you from doing anything at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Risk is inherent in any business endeavor,
Mm.
and trying to eliminate it completely can actually stifle, innovation and growth.
Right.
So the key is understanding your risk tolerance. What level of risk are you comfortable with?
Right.
Identifying those risks that matter most
Right.
and developing strategies to mitigate them.
So be smart about risk. Don't let it control you, but
Exactly.
use it as a guidepost.
Yeah, to make strategic decisions.
That makes sense. What else?
Another key principle is to embrace a long-term perspective.
Right.
Don't just focus on the immediate threats.
Yeah.
Think about those broader geopolitical trends and
Yeah.
how they might shape the future of your industry.
So instead of just putting out fires, you're thinking about how to fireproof your entire business for the long haul.
Exactly. And that might involve making some tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
Like shifting investments to new markets
Yeah.
or diversifying your product portfolio.
So adapting to the changing landscape, being flexible, not getting stuck in the old ways of doing things.
Absolutely. Because, in today's world, the only constant is change.
Right.
Right. And companies that can embrace that reality and even thrive on it, those are the ones that are going to succeed.
So being a bit of a chameleon, right?
Yeah.
Blending into the environment, adapting your colors to match the changing terrain. But I mean, how do you know when to make those big shifts?
Yeah.
Right? What are the signs that the geopolitical ground is shifting beneath your feet?
That is a great question, and that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive. We're going to be looking at the specific signals that companies are watching for
Okay.
and how they're using those signals to make strategic decisions in this ever-evolving geopolitical landscape.
Okay, so we've talked about how companies are getting ready for those geopolitical curveballs. But how do they know when to actually make a move? What are they watching for? What are the signals that things are about to change?
Right. It's like they need some kind of early warning system.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what many companies are developing. They're calling them geopolitical radar systems.
Geopolitical radar.
Yeah, they're constantly scanning the horizon, looking for any subtle shifts,
Yeah.
that could signal bigger changes down the road.
So what are some of the things they're looking for? What are those blips on the radar?
Okay, well, one big one is political instability.
Okay.
So think about rising nationalism, social unrest, even just increasingly polarized political discourse.
Yeah.
All of those things can be early indicators of potential policy shifts, regulatory changes, maybe even social upheaval.
Right. So it's not just about watching elections. It's about paying attention to the overall political climate.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about understanding the underlying dynamics that could create a more volatile business environment.
Right. So it's like sensing the mood in a room before a big announcement, Like you can kind of feel it.
Yeah, exactly. You can sense that something's about to happen.
Right.
And then, of course, economic indicators.
Right.
Those are crucial.
Yeah.
So things like currency fluctuations, inflation rates, changes in consumer confidence,
Mm-hmm.
all of that can signal potential shifts in the economic landscape.
So it's not just about looking at your company's numbers. It's about looking at the big picture.
Yeah. Got to keep an eye on the global economy because, even if your company's doing well, a sudden economic downturn in a key market,
Right.
could have a ripple effect across your entire business. And then, let's not forget about climate change.
Yes. the big one. It feels like every day there's another story about extreme weather events, rising sea levels, not enough water. It's hard to imagine any business being immune to the impacts of that.
It's definitely a major factor, and companies are starting to, factor in climate risks into their strategic planning.
Right.
They're looking at how vulnerable they are to climate-related disruptions, exploring ways to reduce their environmental impact, and even looking for, new business opportunities that address climate challenges.
So it's not just about being a good corporate citizen. It's about recognizing that climate change is a real business risk.
It is. It's a game changer.
And then, of course, there's the whole world of technological advancements.
Yeah.
AI, automation, biotech. It feels like we're living in a science fiction novel.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And all of that stuff can create, both opportunities and risks for businesses.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, these technologies can drive, innovation, efficiency, new growth.
Right.
But they can also disrupt existing business models, create new competitive threats, and, even raise some ethical questions that companies need to grapple with.
So it's like riding a wave.
Right. Yeah.
If you could stay on top of it, it could take you amazing places.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just about keeping up with the latest gadgets. It's about understanding how these technologies are going to reshape the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of reshaping the world, what about those things that nobody sees coming?
Oh, you mean the Black Swan events?
Yeah, exactly. Like the pandemic, right. Nobody predicted that, but it had a massive impact on everyone.
Yeah, it was a real wake-up call.
Yeah, and it kind of showed that no matter how much you plan and prepare, sometimes things happen that you just can't anticipate.
Right. But the companies that had already invested in risk management and agility, they were better able to adapt.
Yeah, it's like building up that muscle memory, right?
Yeah.
To deal with whatever life throws at you. So how do companies navigate all this?
Right.
How do they balance managing risk with, going after new opportunities in a world that's constantly changing?
Well, I think the first step is to just embrace the fact that the world is complex
Okay.
and unpredictable. And it's okay to not have all the answers.
Okay, so be comfortable with uncertainty.
Exactly, yeah. And be willing to adapt. Be a lifelong learner.
So it's more about having the right mindset than, having a perfect plan.
I think so, yeah. And, don't be afraid to challenge assumptions.
Okay.
Ask questions, think outside the box.
Be a bit of a rebel.
Yeah. Be willing to explore new territory and, build a network of people who can support you.
Right, because in this kind of world, you can't do it alone.
You can't. Collaboration is key.
Yeah. Share your knowledge, learn from each other, and be there for each other when things get tough.
Yeah. And on that note, don't forget to take care of yourself too.
That's important.
Yeah, this stuff can be mentally and emotionally draining.
It can be.
So prioritize your well-being, find ways to manage stress and stay connected to the things that matter most.
Yeah, because it's not just about surviving. It's about thriving.
Exactly. So to our listeners out there, keep exploring these ideas, keep asking questions, keep learning.
Knowledge is power. The more we understand this complex world, the better we'll be able to navigate it and create a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's it for this deep dive, everyone.